Imagine a single fire erasing thousands of years of human knowledge. Imagine a world where electricity, medicine, and even space travel could have been discovered centuries earlier. What if humanity's future was stolen from the flames of one building? Picture this: steam engines powering Rome, ships across the Atlantic, and 180 medieval surgeons performing precise operations with advanced anesthesia. Renaissance astronomers launching rockets to the moon. All of this was possible. All of this knowledge existed, and all of it burned. Who destroyed the Library of Alexandria? Was it Julius Caesar's desperate gamble? Christian zealots destroying pagan wisdom? Muslim conquerors erasing the past? Or something more sinister, a systematic conspiracy to control human knowledge? Tonight, we dive deep into one of history's greatest mysteries and uncover evidence that could change everything you thought you knew about the ancient world. We'll reveal the shocking truth about what was really inside those scrolls, why multiple civilizations fought to destroy it, and why some scholars believe fragments of this lost knowledge still exist today, hidden in secret locations around the world. This is the story of humanity's greatest library, its mysterious destruction, and the conspiracy that may have stolen our future. The year is 336 BC. A 20-year-old Macedonian prince named Alexander stands over his father's corpse, murdered by his own bodyguard during a wedding celebration. Within hours, Alexander has eliminated his rivals and claimed the throne. Within 2 years, he'll begin a conquest that will change the world forever. But Alexander the Great wasn't just a military genius. He was history's first global knowledge collector. As his armies swept across Asia, Alexander brought with him a team of scholars, scribes, and scientists whose mission was to document everything they encountered. When Alexander's forces reached India, they didn't just conquer cities. They copied Sanskrit manuscripts on mathematics, medicine, and astronomy. When they entered Babylon, they seized cuneiform tablets containing thousands of years of astronomical observations. Alexander understood something that would escape most conquerors. Military power was temporary, but knowledge was eternal. A city could rebel against occupation, but ideas, once captured and understood, became permanent assets. When Alexander died unexpectedly in Babylon in 323 BC, his empire immediately fractured among his generals. Egypt fell to Ptolemy I Soter, Alexander's childhood friend and bodyguard. But Ptolemy inherited more than just Egyptian territory. He inherited Alexander's vision of knowledge as the ultimate weapon of empire. Ptolemy established his capital in Alexandria, the city Alexander had founded on Egypt's Mediterranean coast. But unlike other Hellenistic rulers who focused on military expansion or economic exploitation, Ptolemy made a revolutionary decision. He would make Alexandria the intellectual capital of the world. The plan was breathtaking in its ambition. Ptolemy would create an institution that would systematically collect, preserve, and expand upon all human knowledge. Not just Greek knowledge, not just Egyptian knowledge. LL knowledge from every civilization, every culture, every tradition that had ever developed written records. This wasn't just about building a big library. This was about creating what we would recognize today as the world's first research university, combined with the world's most comprehensive intelligence operation. The Ptolemies understood that information was power, and they intended to monopolize both. When Ptolemy II Philadelphus ascended to the throne in 283 BC, he inherited his father's intellectual ambitions and possessed the resources to achieve them. Egypt was the ancient world's wealthiest nation, controlling Mediterranean trade routes and producing surplus grain that could support large populations of non-productive scholars and scribes. Ptolemy II issued a decree that would seem impossible in today's world. Every ship entering Alexandria as harbor would be boarded by royal officials, who would confiscate every written document found on board. Merchants, diplomats, travelers, sailors, everyone was subject to search, not for contraband or weapons, but for knowledge. But this wasn't simple theft. The Ptolemies established the ancient world's most sophisticated copying operation. Teams of professional scribes worked in shifts around the clock to duplicate confiscated texts. The process was systematic and thorough. Original documents were carefully examined, authenticated, and cataloged before copying began. Multiple copies were made of important works to ensure preservation. The originals were retained for the royal collection, while high-quality copies were returned to their owners along with monetary compensation for the inconvenience. The operation's scale was unprecedented in human history. Alexandria's harbor was the ancient Mediterranean's busiest port, with hundreds of ships arriving monthly from across 3 continents. Indian merchants brought Sanskrit texts on mathematics, medicine, and philosophy. Chinese traders carried silk-wrapped scrolls describing advanced metallurgy and engineering techniques. Phoenician navigators possessed detailed charts of Atlantic coastlines and African trade routes. Babylonian priests transported cuneiform tablets containing centuries of astronomical observations and mathematical calculations. Each arriving ship represented a new opportunity to expand humanity's knowledge base. The Ptolemaic acquisition teams developed expertise in identifying valuable texts regardless of language or writing system. They maintained networks of translators capable of working with dozens of different scripts and languages. They established relationships with foreign scholars and officials who could provide context and authentication for important documents. But the harbor confiscation program was only the beginning. The Ptolemies actively recruited scholars from across the ancient world with offers that would make modern universities weep with envy. The museum, literally meaning Shrine of the Muses, provided selected scholars with free housing, free meals, tax exemptions, and unlimited access to the world's greatest collection of written knowledge. There were no teaching obligations, no administrative duties, no requirements except the pursuit of knowledge itself. The recruitment program was global and aggressive. Ptolemy II personally corresponded with scholars in Athens, Damascus, Babylon, and Rome, offering generous terms for relocation to Alexandria. He provided travel expenses, moving allowances, and guaranteed positions for family members. He established pension systems for retired scholars and burial benefits for those who died in Alexandria's service. The results were extraordinary. By 250 BC, Alexandria hosted the largest concentration of brilliant minds in human history. Mathematicians worked alongside astronomers. Physicians collaborated with engineers. Philosophers debated with historians. The cross-cultural intellectual exchange was unprecedented. Greek theoretical frameworks were applied to Babylonian observational data. Egyptian practical engineering was enhanced by Indian mathematical techniques. Persian philosophical concepts were integrated with Chinese technological innovations. But the Ptolemies didn't limit themselves to passive collection. They actively sought out rare and unique texts through diplomatic and commercial networks. When Athens possessed the only original manuscripts of classical Greek drama, works by Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides that existed nowhere else, Ptolemy III launched what amounted to a scholarly heist. He requested to borrow the originals temporarily for copying, offering 15 talents of silver as collateral, roughly equivalent to $2 million in contemporary currency. Athens, desperate for Egyptian grain during a poor harvest year, agreed to the arrangement. The precious manuscripts were shipped to Alexandria under heavy guard. Instead of copying and returning them as promised, Ptolemy III kept the originals and sent back high-quality copies. He forfeited the enormous collateral payment without complaint, effectively purchasing the world's only original Greek dramatic manuscripts at astronomical cost. The message to the scholarly world was unmistakable. Alexandria would acquire humanity's intellectual heritage, regardless of expense. By 230 BC, the Great Library contained an estimated 700,000 individual scrolls, equivalent to approximately 100,000 modern books. But these weren't ordinary books. They represented the concentrated intellectual output of every major civilization on Earth. The collection included complete archives of Greek mathematics and philosophy, comprehensive Babylonian astronomical records, spanning over a millennium, detailed Egyptian medical and engineering texts, Sanskrit works on mathematics and astronomy, Chinese technological manuals, Persian poetry and philosophy, and African oral traditions that had been transcribed for the first time. This was humanity's first systematic attempt at creating a comprehensive backup of civilization itself. And for nearly 3 centuries, it worked brilliantly. The Library of Alexandria wasn't just a storage facility for ancient knowledge. It was a thinking machine powered by history's greatest intellects. The scholars who worked there didn't merely preserve existing information. They synthesized knowledge from multiple civilizations to achieve breakthroughs that wouldn't be equaled for centuries after the library's destruction. Consider Euclid of Alexandria, whose Elements became the foundation of Western mathematics for over 2 millennia. But Euclid wasn't working in isolation or building solely upon Greek mathematical traditions. The library provided him with access to Babylonian algebraic techniques that had been developed over centuries, Egyptian geometric principles refined through millennia of pyramid construction, and Indian numerical systems that included revolutionary concepts like zero and place value notation. Euclid's genius lay not in inventing geometry, but in synthesizing geometric knowledge from multiple civilizations into a coherent, logical system. His famous postulates and proofs represented a distillation of mathematical wisdom that had been accumulated across cultures for thousands of years. The Elements was possible only because Alexandria's collection allowed a single scholar to survey the entire mathematical heritage of the ancient world. Working in the same period, Eratosthenes of Cyrene achieved one of antiquity's most remarkable scientific accomplishments, calculating the Earth's circumference to within 2% accuracy using nothing but shadows, geometry, and the walking pace of a camel caravan. But Eratosthenes' calculation wasn't just a brilliant individual insight. It was the product of systematic research using Alexandria's unparalleled geographic collection. The library contained detailed surveys and measurements collected by Egyptian explorers, Phoenician navigators, and Greek colonists across the Mediterranean. Eratosthenes had access to accurate distance measurements between cities, detailed descriptions of seasonal shadow variations at different latitudes, and comprehensive astronomical observations that confirmed the Earth's spherical shape. His famous measurement between Alexandria and Syene was possible because the library's geographic archives provided the precise distance and astronomical data necessary for the calculation. Perhaps even more remarkably, Eratosthenes used his Earth measurement techniques to calculate the distance to the Sun and Moon, estimate the Earth's axial tilt, and create the first systematic latitude and longitude coordinate system. These achievements required not just individual brilliance, but access to observational data and mathematical techniques from multiple civilizations. Aristarchus of Samos proposed the revolutionary concept that Earth orbited the Sun 18 centuries before Copernicus. But Aristarchus' heliocentric model wasn't merely speculative. It was based on careful mathematical analysis of planetary motions using Babylonian observational records that spanned over 1,000 years. The Babylonians had been systematically tracking planetary positions, eclipse cycles, and stellar movements since approximately 750 BC. Their records were so precise that they could predict lunar eclipses, planetary conjunctions, and seasonal variations with remarkable accuracy. Aristarchus gained access to this accumulated data through Alexandria's collection and used Greek geometric methods to analyze Babylonian observations. His heliocentric model explained several astronomical puzzles that had troubled ancient astronomers. Why planets sometimes appeared to move backward against the stellar background, why Venus and Mercury were always observed near the Sun, and why seasonal variations in star positions followed predictable patterns. Aristarchus even attempted to calculate the relative distances to the Sun and Moon using geometric methods applied to eclipse observations. The tragedy is that Aristarchus' heliocentric model was rejected by most ancient astronomers, not because it was scientifically inadequate, but because it conflicted with philosophical and religious assumptions about Earth's special status in the cosmos. When the library burned, Aristarchus' detailed mathematical arguments and supporting evidence were lost, leaving only fragmentary references in later works. Archimedes of Syracuse, though based in Sicily, maintained extensive scholarly correspondence with Alexandria's mathematicians and had access to the library's engineering collections during his visits to Egypt. His famous mechanical inventions, the Archimedes screw, compound pulley systems, war machines, and hydraulic devices, were based on careful study of engineering techniques preserved in Alexandria's technical archives. The library contained detailed Egyptian irrigation and construction manuals, Babylonian hydraulic engineering specifications, and Greek theoretical works on mechanics and physics. Archimedes synthesized this accumulated engineering knowledge with original mathematical analysis to create mechanical devices that were far in advance of their time. His lost work, Method of Mechanical Theorems, described techniques for using mechanical reasoning to solve mathematical problems, essentially using physics to discover mathematical truths. This approach was revolutionary because it combined theoretical mathematics with practical engineering in ways that wouldn't be systematically developed again until the scientific revolution. But perhaps the most remarkable Alexandrian scholar was Hero, who lived during the 1st century AD when the library was past its prime, but still contained much of its original collection. Hero was a mathematician, engineer, and inventor whose works demonstrate the extraordinary technological sophistication that was possible when ancient knowledge traditions were systematically combined. Hero's most famous invention was the Aeolipile, the world's first steam engine. But Hero's steam engine wasn't a primitive curiosity. It was a sophisticated device based on precise understanding of thermodynamics, metallurgy, and mechanical engineering. Hero understood that heated water vapor could produce mechanical motion, that proper valve systems could control steam flow, and that gear ratios could multiply rotational force. The technological knowledge necessary for Hero's steam engine existed in Alexandria's collection. Egyptian metallurgical techniques for creating strong bronze containers, Babylonian knowledge of precise boring and grinding techniques for fitting mechanical parts, Greek theoretical understanding of pneumatics and hydraulics, and Roman practical experience with heating systems and furnaces. Hero didn't just build a steam engine. He wrote comprehensive manuals describing dozens of automated mechanical devices, programmable automated theaters that performed complete dramatic scenes, coin-operated temple devices that dispensed holy water, automatic doors that opened when altar fires were lit, and mechanical calculating devices that could perform arithmetical operations. His surviving works, Pneumatica, Automatopoetica, and Mechanica, represent perhaps the most advanced technological knowledge of the ancient world. They describe techniques for creating precision gears, cam mechanisms, valve systems, and programmable control devices that wouldn't be reinvented in Europe until the late medieval period. The tragedy is that Hero's technological innovations were treated as amusing curiosities rather than practical tools. Ancient Mediterranean society had abundant slave labor and limited economic incentive for mechanical automation. The steam engine was used to operate temple doors and theatrical devices rather than power mills, ships, or transportation systems. But the knowledge existed. The technological capability was there. If economic and social conditions had favored mechanical innovation, Hero's steam engines could have powered an industrial revolution in the 2nd century AD. Instead, the knowledge remained dormant in Alexandria's archives until the entire collection was destroyed. Hipparchus of Nicaea made perhaps the most precise astronomical discovery of the ancient world, the precession of the equinoxes. this phenomenon, the slow wobble of Earth's rotational axis that causes gradual shifts in stellar positions over centuries, requires extremely accurate observational data spanning long time periods to detect. Hipparchus' discovery was possible because Alexandria's collection contained Babylonian star charts and planetary observations dating back over 800 years. By comparing ancient Babylonian star positions with his own contemporary observations, Hipparchus detected subtle but systematic changes that revealed Earth's axial precession. This discovery required not just individual observational skill, but access to accumulated data that no individual observer could have collected within a single lifetime. Hipparchus' work demonstrated the power of systematic knowledge preservation. Scientific discoveries that were impossible for individual researchers became achievable when multiple generations of observations were systematically maintained and analyzed. Apollonius of Perga developed the mathematical theory of conic sections, ellipses, parabolas, and hyperbolas that would later become essential for Johannes Kepler's analysis of planetary orbits. But Apollonius' work was based on geometric principles and analytical techniques from multiple mathematical traditions preserved in Alexandria's collection. He combined Greek geometric reasoning with Babylonian algebraic methods and Egyptian practical measurement techniques to create a comprehensive theory of curved lines and surfaces. His 8-volume Conics represented the most advanced mathematical analysis of the ancient world and provided essential foundations for later developments in astronomy, physics, and engineering. The Alexandrian scholars were unisolated geniuses working alone. They were nodes in an intellectual network that amplified human intelligence through systematic access to accumulated wisdom. Their breakthroughs were possible because Alexandria's collection allowed individual minds to build upon the collective knowledge of entire civilizations. When the library was destroyed, humanity lost not just individual texts or discoveries, but the methodology itself, the systematic approach to knowledge synthesis that made rapid intellectual progress possible. To understand what humanity lost when Alexandria burned, we must examine the specific technologies and scientific principles that existed within its walls, knowledge so advanced that some of it wouldn't be rediscovered for over 1,000 years. The library's engineering collection contained detailed specifications for advanced mechanical devices that could have triggered an industrial revolution in ancient times. These weren't theoretical designs or primitive prototypes, but working technologies with practical applications that were systematically documented and preserved. Consider the mechanical computing devices that existed in ancient Greece. The famous Antikythera mechanism, discovered in a Mediterranean shipwreck, was a bronze analog computer capable of predicting eclipses, tracking planetary movements, and calculating Olympic Games schedules decades in advance. But the Antikythera device wasn't unique. It was one example of a sophisticated, technological tradition that produced mechanical computers for various astronomical and mathematical purposes. The library contained complete technical manuals for constructing and operating these mechanical computers. The texts included detailed specifications for gear cutting, precise measurements for gear ratios, instructions for calibrating astronomical parameters, and maintenance procedures for keeping the devices accurate over years of operation. But the Antikythera-type devices were just the beginning. Alexandria's engineering archives described more advanced mechanical systems, automatic record-keeping devices that could track inventory and calculate taxes, mechanical looms that could weave complex patterns automatically, and precision measuring instruments that could determine time distance and weight with remarkable accuracy. The knowledge existed to mass-produce mechanical clocks centuries before they appeared in medieval Europe. Ancient Mediterranean craftsmen possessed the metallurgical skills to create precision gears, the mathematical knowledge to calculate accurate gear ratios, and the engineering expertise to construct reliable mechanical systems. Hero's pneumatic devices demonstrated sophisticated understanding of pressure systems, vacuum effects, and thermodynamic principles. His designs included steam-powered fountains, air pressure door systems, automatic fire detection devices, and pneumatic message transmission systems. These technologies could have been scaled up to create urban infrastructure systems, centralized heating for entire districts, automated water distribution networks, and rapid communication systems linking different parts of large cities. The library's metallurgical collection contained techniques for producing high-quality steel that wouldn't be matched in Europe until the late medieval period. Ancient smiths understood how to control carbon content in iron alloys, how to heat-treat metals for maximum strength, and how to create specialized alloys for specific purposes. Chinese technological manuscripts in Alexandria describe blast furnace designs capable of reaching temperatures necessary for cast iron production. These furnaces used sophisticated air circulation systems, precise fuel mixing ratios, and advanced ceramic linings that could withstand extreme heat cycles. The technology existed to mass-produce high-quality iron tools, weapons, and construction materials on an industrial scale. But perhaps the most remarkable technological knowledge involved precision optics and scientific instruments. The library contained detailed instructions for grinding and polishing optical lenses, creating accurate astronomical instruments, and building precision balance systems for scientific measurements. Ancient astronomers could create telescopes centuries before they were reinvented in early modern Europe. The mathematical principles of optics were well understood. The glass-making techniques existed to produce clear optical elements, and the mechanical skills were available to create stable mounting systems. Telescopic observations could have revolutionized ancient astronomy, allowing detailed study of planetary surfaces, lunar features, and stellar phenomena. The agricultural technology preserved in Alexandria could have supported much larger populations with significantly less labor. The collection included advanced irrigation system designs, soil improvement techniques, crop rotation methods, and selective breeding programs for livestock and grain varieties. Egyptian agricultural texts described sophisticated hydraulic systems that could distribute water across vast areas using gravity-fed canal networks, automatic sluice gates, and precision water measuring devices. These systems could have transformed arid regions into productive farmland and supported dense urban populations without depleting natural resources. The library's medical collection represented the accumulated healing knowledge of multiple civilizations spanning thousands of years. Indian surgical texts described cataract removal procedures, bone-setting techniques, and advanced wound treatment methods. Chinese medical manuscripts detailed acupuncture systems, herbal pharmacology, and diagnostic techniques based on systematic observation of symptoms and disease patterns. Egyptian medical papyri contained surgical procedures for brain surgery, sophisticated dental treatments, and anatomical knowledge gained through thousands of years of mummification practices. Greek medical works combined theoretical understanding of bodily systems with practical treatment, methods based on careful clinical observation. The synthesis of these medical traditions could have produced healing systems far more effective than anything available in Europe during the medieval period. Advanced surgical techniques, comprehensive pharmacological knowledge, and systematic diagnostic methods could have prevented or treated diseases that killed millions of people during the European Dark Ages. But the most profound technological loss involved navigation and exploration capabilities. The library contained the complete navigational archives of the Phoenicians, the ancient world's greatest maritime explorers. These records included detailed sailing directions for voyages spanning from Britain to East Africa, precise astronomical navigation techniques, and comprehensive knowledge of ocean currents, wind patterns, and seasonal weather variations. Phoenician navigators had developed sophisticated techniques for long-distance ocean travel, accurate methods for determining position using stellar observations, reliable systems for predicting weather patterns, and detailed knowledge of coastal landmarks and harbor facilities across 3 continents. The library also contained Chinese navigational texts describing magnetic compass systems and advanced shipbuilding techniques. Chinese shipwrights understood how to construct large ocean-going vessels with multiple masts, watertight compartments, and sophisticated steering systems. They had developed techniques for long-distance navigation using magnetic compasses, detailed star charts, and systematic recording of voyage data. The combination of Phoenician exploration knowledge and Chinese maritime technology could have enabled systematic exploration of the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans centuries before Columbus. Ancient navigators possessed the knowledge and tools necessary for transoceanic voyages, detailed mapping of unknown coastlines, and establishment of regular trade routes across vast ocean distances. The technological capability existed for ancient civilizations to explore and settle the Americas, establish regular contact between Europe and Asia via oceanic routes, and create truly global trade and communication networks. The knowledge was there, preserved in Alexandria's archives, waiting to be applied systematically. But it never happened. Instead of technological revolution, the ancient world experienced technological stagnation. Instead of systematic application of existing knowledge, innovations were treated as curiosities or religious artifacts. Instead of industrial development, ancient societies relied on slave labor and traditional production methods. When Alexandria burned, humanity lost not just individual technologies, but entire systematic approaches to innovation, research, and development that wouldn't be recreated until the modern scientific revolution. The question that haunts historians is simple. If this knowledge had survived and been systematically applied, how different would human history have been? Would we have reached the stars centuries earlier? Would we have developed sustainable technologies that prevented environmental destruction? Would we have created more peaceful and prosperous civilizations? We'll never know. The fire took those possibilities with it. 48 BC. Gaius Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in Rome, finds himself trapped in Alexandria with fewer than 4,000 troops facing a hostile Egyptian army of over 20,000 soldiers. He's officially in Egypt to collect debts owed to Roman merchants, but everyone knows his real purpose: to control the succession dispute between Cleopatra VII and her younger brother Ptolemy XIII, and through it, Egypt's wealth. Caesar's situation is desperate. Ptolemy XIII's forces control most of Alexandria and have surrounded Caesar's small army near the royal harbor. Egyptian ships patrol the harbor entrance, preventing Roman reinforcements from landing and cutting off Caesar's escape route by sea. The young Ptolemy's advisors, led by the eunuch Pothinus and General Achillas, believe they can eliminate Roman influence in Egypt by destroying Caesar's force entirely. But Caesar didn't conquer Gaul and defeat Pompey by accepting impossible situations. He makes a characteristically bold decision. If he can't control the harbor, he'll deny it to his enemies. Caesar orders his forces to use fire arrows and incendiary devices to burn the entire Egyptian fleet anchored in Alexandria's harbor. The plan works brilliantly from a tactical perspective. Dozens of Egyptian warships and transport vessels are destroyed within hours, eliminating Ptolemy's naval advantage and preventing Egyptian forces from receiving seaborne reinforcements. But ancient Alexandria was built primarily of limestone blocks and cedar wood, with narrow streets and closely packed buildings. The harbor fire spreads beyond the docks. What happens next depends on which historical account you believe, and those accounts reflect the political biases of their authors. Roman historians, writing after Caesar became dictator and was subsequently deified, minimize the fire's impact on Alexandria's intellectual infrastructure. They describe limited damage to harbor warehouses and shipping records, suggesting that the fire was contained quickly and affected only commercial facilities. But contemporary Egyptian sources tell a different story. They describe catastrophic destruction extending deep into the city's cultural district, with flames reaching the edges of the museum quarter and destroying portions of the library's satellite collections. According to these accounts, approximately 40,000 scrolls were lost in the harbor fires, roughly 6% of the library's total holdings. Modern archaeological analysis suggests the truth lies somewhere between these extreme accounts. Caesar's fire almost certainly destroyed the harbor warehouses, where newly arrived scrolls were stored awaiting cataloging and copying. This collection represented decades of systematic acquisition from across the ancient world: Indian mathematical texts, Babylonian astronomical records, Chinese technological manuals, and African oral traditions that had been transcribed for the first time. But the damage extended beyond immediate scroll destruction. Caesar's fire severed the library's acquisition network that had operated continuously for over 2 centuries. Ships arriving in Alexandria were no longer systematically searched for written materials. Foreign scholars stopped sending texts to Alexandria for copying and preservation. The steady flow of new knowledge that had made the library a dynamic, growing institution was permanently interrupted. More importantly, Caesar's actions revealed the library as fundamental vulnerability. It was a centralized system dependent on political stability and governmental support. When Egypt's political leadership changed from Ptolemaic rule to Roman domination, the library's mission and resources could be redirected to serve Rome rather than universal interests. Caesar's post-fire policies confirmed this strategic reorientation. Rather than helping to rebuild Alexandria's collection, Caesar systematically recruited Egyptian scholars to relocate to Rome. He confiscated surviving mathematical and astronomical texts to be translated for Roman military and administrative use. He established new libraries in Rome using knowledge and expertise extracted from Egypt. The most telling evidence of Caesar's intentions comes from his treatment of specific scholars. Apollodorus of Alexandria, Cleopatra's mathematical advisor, was brought to Rome and assigned to work on engineering projects for Caesar's urban development programs. Demetrius of Phalerum, the library's chief cataloger, was relocated to Rome and tasked with organizing captured Greek manuscripts for Roman administrative purposes. Caesar understood that intellectual resources were as valuable as gold or grain. By controlling Egypt's scholars and their accumulated knowledge, he could enhance Roman technological and administrative capabilities while weakening Egyptian intellectual independence. The fire also had immediate practical consequences for Caesar's own military situation. The destruction of Alexandria's harbor facilities forced him to rely entirely on land-based supply lines, making his position even more precarious. But Caesar had achieved his primary strategic objective. Egyptian naval power was eliminated, and the political balance in Alexandria shifted decisively toward Roman interests. Cleopatra, who had allied herself with Caesar, emerged as the dominant claimant to Egypt's throne. But her victory came at the cost of Egypt's intellectual autonomy. The library would continue to exist under Roman protection, but its mission would be subordinated to Roman imperial interests rather than universal knowledge preservation. The long-term consequences were even more significant. Caesar's fire established a precedent for treating accumulated knowledge as a strategic resource to be controlled rather than preserved. Future Roman leaders would view Alexandria as remaining collections as assets to be exploited for immediate political purposes rather than cultural treasures to be maintained for future generations. Caesar's burning of Alexandria's harbor wasn't the library's complete destruction, but it was the beginning of its systematic dismantling. The institution's political independence was broken, its acquisition network was severed, and its scholarly community was dispersed to serve Roman rather than universal interests. But Caesar's fire was only the first of several catastrophes that would progressively destroy humanity's greatest repository of knowledge. Each subsequent crisis would eliminate different portions of the collection until nothing remained but fragments and memories. The real tragedy of Caesar's fire isn't just the scrolls that burned in 48 BC, It's the precedent it established for treating knowledge as a political weapon rather than a universal human heritage. By 391 AD, the Roman Empire had undergone a revolutionary transformation that would reshape the ancient world's intellectual landscape forever. Emperor Theodosius I had declared Nicene Christianity the empire's official religion, and imperial edicts now mandated the closure of pagan temples throughout the Mediterranean world. In Alexandria, this religious revolution created an unprecedented crisis. The city's intellectual heritage was inextricably linked with pagan learning traditions that Christianity viewed as fundamentally corrupted. The library's collections contained thousands of texts on pagan theology, philosophy, and scientific theories that contradicted Christian doctrine. The museum's scholarly community included many prominent pagans who refused to convert to Christianity. Archbishop Theophilus of Alexandria received imperial authorization to convert pagan temples into Christian churches. But the situation in Alexandria was uniquely complex. The Serapeum, Alexandria's second largest temple, wasn't just a religious site. It was the library's main branch, containing hundreds of thousands of scrolls on mathematics, astronomy, medicine, engineering, and philosophy. Theophilus faced a dilemma that would determine the fate of ancient learning. He could preserve the Serapeum's intellectual contents while converting the building to Christian use, or he could eliminate pagan contamination by destroying the entire collection. Christian theological authorities were divided on this question, with some arguing for preservation of useful secular knowledge and others demanding complete elimination of pagan influences. Theophilus chose destruction. In 391 he organized Christian mobs to storm the Serapeum and systematically destroy its contents. But this wasn't random vandalism. It was ideologically motivated. Cultural revolution designed to eliminate specific types of knowledge that threatened Christian authority. The destruction followed systematic patterns that reveal the ideological priorities driving the attack. Pagan religious texts were burned immediately as demonic corruption. Philosophical works that contradicted Christian doctrine about the nature of God, human souls, or moral behavior were targeted for elimination. Scientific texts that conflicted with biblical cosmology, works describing heliocentrism, evolutionary theories, or geological timescales were systematically destroyed. But the Christian revolutionaries also eliminated texts that contained no religious content whatsoever. Mathematical works were burned because they represented pagan intellectual achievement. Medical texts were destroyed because they originated from non-Christian sources. Engineering manuals were eliminated because they might enable pagan communities to rebuild their institutional infrastructure. The attack on secular learning wasn't motivated by anti-intellectual sentiment, but by recognition that knowledge represented power. As long as pagan communities maintained intellectual superiority in mathematics, medicine, astronomy, or engineering, Christian authority would remain incomplete. Systematic knowledge destruction was a strategic necessity for establishing complete Christian cultural dominance. The scholar who came to symbolize this intellectual persecution was Hypatia of Alexandria, the last great mathematician and philosopher of the ancient world. Hypatia was born around 350 AD to Alexandria's scholarly elite. Her father, Theon of Alexandria, was the museum's last official director and one of the ancient world's greatest mathematical commentators. Hypatia represented everything that made Alexandria's intellectual tradition remarkable. She was a brilliant mathematician who developed new techniques for solving algebraic equations and geometric problems. She was an innovative astronomer who designed improved astrolabes and other scientific instruments. She was an influential philosopher who attracted students from across the Mediterranean to study Platonic and Aristotelian philosophy. But Hypatia's real significance was in her individual scholarship. It was her role as a bridge between ancient learning traditions and the Christian world. Many of her students were Christians who valued classical education. She maintained friendly relationships with Christian intellectuals who appreciated her mathematical expertise. She represented the possibility that ancient wisdom could be preserved and integrated with Christian theology. This integration was exactly what Christian authorities feared most. Hypatia's influence demonstrated that pagan learning could compete with Christian doctrine for intellectual authority. Her students, including many from prominent Christian families, preferred classical philosophical training to church-based education. Her public lectures drew larger audiences than most Christian sermons. Archbishop Cyril of Alexandria, Theophilus's nephew and successor, recognized Hypatia as a threat to Christian intellectual monopoly. Her continued prominence suggested that secular learning could maintain independence from religious control. Her influence with political leaders, including the Roman prefect Orestes, gave her platform for promoting classical education over Christian indoctrination. In March 415 AD, during the Christian season of Lent, Cyril orchestrated Hypatia's assassination. A mob of Christian zealots, possibly including ordained clergy, dragged her from her chariot as she traveled through Alexandria's streets. They stripped her naked, scraped her flesh from her bones using oyster shells, and burned her remains in a public square. Hypatia's murder wasn't random violence. It was calculated terrorism designed to eliminate intellectual opposition to Christian authority. The brutal method of execution was chosen to maximize psychological impact on Alexandria's remaining pagan scholars. The public burning of her body symbolically linked her fate to the destruction of pagan texts. The message was unmistakable. Independent intellectual authority would not be tolerated in Christian Alexandria. Scholars could convert to Christianity and subordinate their learning to religious doctrine, or they could face persecution, exile, or death. The consequences were immediate and devastating. Surviving pagan scholars fled Alexandria for Constantinople, Athens, or Persia. The museum's scholarly community, which had existed continuously for over 600 years, effectively dissolved within a decade of Hypatia's murder. The library's remaining collections were either destroyed as pagan contamination or abandoned as politically dangerous to maintain. But the Christian destruction of Alexandria's intellectual heritage wasn't purely negative. Some Christian scholars recognized the value of preserving useful secular knowledge while eliminating dangerous pagan influences. They developed techniques for copying mathematical and astronomical texts while removing references to pagan gods or philosophical theories. Christian monasteries began preserving selected ancient texts, particularly medical and agricultural works that had practical applications. Monastic scriptoriums maintained copying operations that preserved fragments of ancient learning, though they were selective about which texts deserved preservation. The Christian preservation effort was geographically dispersed rather than centralized. Instead of maintaining comprehensive collections in single locations like Alexandria, Christian scholars distributed copies of important texts across multiple monasteries and churches. This dispersion made knowledge less vulnerable to complete destruction, but it also made systematic research and cross-referencing much more difficult. By 450 AD, Alexandria's role as the Mediterranean world's intellectual capital had ended permanently. The city remained economically important as a trade center, but its scholarly community was gone. Its comprehensive collections were destroyed or scattered, and its institutional infrastructure for systematic knowledge preservation had collapsed. The Christian Revolution had successfully eliminated the independence of secular learning, but at an enormous cost to human intellectual development. Mathematical and scientific progress in the Mediterranean world effectively ceased for several centuries. Technological innovation slowed dramatically. Medical knowledge declined to levels not seen since before the classical period. The irony is that many of the texts destroyed by Christian authorities could have been integrated with Christian theology without significant conflict. Mathematical principles, astronomical observations, medical knowledge, and engineering techniques contained no inherent religious content. They were eliminated not because they contradicted Christian doctrine, but because they represented pagan cultural achievement. December 641, a Arab general, Amr ibn al-As, stands before the walls of Alexandria, commanding an army of 15,000 battle-hardened warriors, fresh from victories across the Middle East and North Africa. The Byzantine garrison, commanded by Cyrus of Alexandria, has already negotiated surrender terms. Within days, the last major Byzantine stronghold in Egypt will fall to Islamic conquest. But as Amr's forces prepare to enter Alexandria, they face a decision that will determine the fate of whatever remains of the ancient world as greatest intellectual treasure. After 250 years of Christian rule, civil wars, and systematic neglect, Alexandria's famous library exists only as scattered fragments housed in various buildings throughout the city. What should be done with these remnants of pagan and Christian learning? The story that has dominated popular imagination for centuries claims that Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab, when consulted about Alexandria's books, declared, "If these books agree with the Quran, they are unnecessary. If they disagree with the Quran, they are heretical. In either case, burn them." According to this account, Alexandria's remaining scrolls were used as fuel for the city's bathhouses, providing 6 months of heating. This dramatic tale of Islamic book burning has been repeated in countless histories, but modern scholarship has conclusively proven it to be a medieval fabrication created during the Crusades to justify Christian military campaigns against Muslim territories. The story first appears in the writings of Abd al-Latif al-Baghdadi in 1203 AD, over 560 years after the conquest, and contradicts everything we know about early Islamic attitudes toward learning and knowledge preservation. The historical reality was dramatically different. The Islamic conquest of Alexandria saved what remained of the ancient world's intellectual heritage and launched the most systematic knowledge preservation effort in human history. The early Islamic empire actively sought out, collected, translated, and preserved texts from Greek, Persian, Sanskrit, Syriac, and other scholarly traditions. Amr ibn al-As himself was a sophisticated leader who understood the strategic value of intellectual resources. Rather than destroying Alexandria's remaining collections, he ordered their systematic cataloging and preservation. Arabic-speaking scholars were recruited to assess the contents of various libraries and determine which texts merited translation and preservation. The Umayyad and Abbasid caliphates that followed established the most ambitious translation movement in human history. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad, founded in the early 9th century, became the medieval world's greatest center of learning by systematically translating Greek, Persian, and Sanskrit works into Arabic. Teams of translators worked for decades to render ancient texts into Arabic while preserving their original meanings and technical precision. But the Islamic translation movement wasn't just preservation. It was active scholarship that built upon ancient foundations to achieve new breakthroughs. Muslim scholars didn't merely copy ancient texts. They studied them, criticized them, improved them, and synthesized knowledge from multiple traditions to create entirely new fields of study. Al-Khwarizmi, working in 9th century Baghdad with access to translated Alexandrian mathematical texts, developed algebra by combining Greek geometric methods with Indian numerical systems and Babylonian astronomical calculations. His Al-Jabr wal-Muqbala created a new mathematical discipline that would not exist without the synthesis of knowledge traditions preserved from Alexandria. Ibn al-Haytham, known in Europe as Al-Hazan, revolutionized optics and experimental science by building upon Greek theoretical frameworks preserved in Arabic translation. His Book of Optics combined Ptolemaic astronomical observations, Euclidean geometric principles, and original experimental investigations to create the first systematic experimental methodology in physical science. Al-Biruni calculated Earth's circumference more accurately than Eratosthenes by improving upon ancient measurement techniques preserved in Arabic translation. But al-Biruni also went far beyond ancient achievements, developing new methods for measuring planetary distances, calculating the speed of light, and determining the specific weights of various minerals and metals. The Islamic scholarly tradition preserved and transmitted ancient knowledge while simultaneously expanding and improving it. Mathematical techniques developed in ancient Alexandria were refined and extended by Muslim mathematicians. Astronomical observations from Babylonian and Greek sources were combined with new Islamic observations to create more accurate planetary models. Medical knowledge from Greek, Persian, and Indian traditions was synthesized into comprehensive healing systems. Perhaps most importantly, Islamic scholars preserved ancient texts that would otherwise have been completely lost. Works by Aristotle, Ptolemy, Galen, Archimedes, and dozens of other ancient authors survived only because Muslim translators considered them valuable enough to preserve in Arabic versions. When European scholars during the Renaissance sought to recover ancient Greek learning, they found it primarily through Arabic translations maintained by Islamic libraries. Universities in Cordoba, Baghdad, Cairo, and Damascus possessed comprehensive collections of ancient texts that had completely disappeared from European libraries. The great irony is that Christian Europe recovered its own classical heritage, largely through Islamic preservation efforts. Works that had been eliminated from European monasteries as pagan contamination were preserved by Muslim scholars who valued them as contributions to human knowledge, regardless of their religious origins. But the Islamic conquest of Alexandria came too late to save most of the library's original contents. By 641 AD, the collection that had once contained 700,000 scrolls had been reduced to scattered fragments housed in various locations throughout the city. Christian destruction, political neglect, and simple physical decay had already eliminated the vast majority of Alexandria's intellectual heritage. What the Islamic conquest accomplished was preventing further loss while preserving and expanding upon whatever remained. The fragments of ancient knowledge that survived Christian persecution were carefully maintained, systematically translated, and actively developed by Islamic scholars, who created new intellectual traditions based on ancient foundations. The Islamic preservation effort was also geographically distributed rather than concentrated in single locations. Ancient texts were copied and housed in libraries across the Islamic world, from Spain to Central Asia. This geographic distribution made knowledge more resistant to local disasters, while making it accessible to scholars across different regions and cultures. However, the Islamic translation movement was selective in its preservation priorities. Texts on mathematics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy, and natural science were actively sought out and preserved. Religious texts from other traditions were generally not maintained. Literary works were preserved inconsistently, depending on their perceived usefulness or aesthetic value. The translation process itself sometimes introduced changes that altered original meanings. Arabic vocabulary didn't always contain precise equivalents for Greek or Sanskrit technical terms. Translators sometimes added interpretive comments that became incorporated into the texts themselves. Multiple translation stages, from Greek to Syriac to Arabic, for example, created opportunities for cumulative distortions. Despite these limitations, the Islamic preservation of ancient learning represents one of humanity's greatest cultural achievements. Without Islamic translation efforts, the scientific revolution in Europe would have been impossible. Renaissance humanism couldn't have recovered classical texts that no longer existed. Modern mathematics, astronomy, and medicine couldn't have built upon ancient foundations that had been completely destroyed. The Islamic conquest of Alexandria marked not the final destruction of ancient learning, but its transformation and geographic dispersion across a vast multilingual empire. Knowledge that had been concentrated in one city was distributed across dozens of centers, translated into multiple languages, and integrated with scholarly traditions from across the known world. This transformation was both a loss and a gain for human intellectual development. Humanity lost the synergistic effects of having all knowledge accessible in one location, but gained the security of distributed preservation and the benefits of cross-cultural scholarly exchange. Imagine a world where the Library of Alexandria never burned, where heroes' steam engines powered Ramang, ships across the Atlantic in 150 AD, where medieval surgeons performed precision operations using techniques preserved from Indian medical texts, where Renaissance astronomers launched rockets to the moon using principles developed by ancient Greek engineers. This isn't fantasy. It's alternate history, based on technologies and knowledge that actually existed in Alexandria's collections. By examining what was lost, we can reconstruct the world that might have been if humanity's greatest repository of knowledge had survived intact. The immediate consequences would have been visible within decades of preservation. Heroes' steam engines, instead of remaining temple curiosities, could have been developed for practical transportation and manufacturing. Roman engineering expertise, combined with preserved steam technology, could have created powered ships capable of oceanic exploration centuries before Columbus. Roman galleys equipped with steam engines could have systematically explored the Atlantic and Pacific coastlines. Ancient navigators possessed the astronomical knowledge necessary for transoceanic navigation, the metallurgical skills to build sturdy ocean-going vessels, and the mathematical techniques to calculate positions and distances accurately. By 200 AD, Roman colonies could have been established in the Americas, with regular steam-powered shipping maintaining contact between Old and New World territories. The demographic catastrophe that devastated Native American populations after European contact might have been avoided through gradual interaction and cultural exchange rather than sudden conquest and disease transmission. The technological implications extend far beyond transportation. Steam power could have mechanized agriculture, mining, and manufacturing throughout the Ramang Empire. Mass production techniques could have improved living standards while reducing the economic dependence on slave labor that weakened Roman social structures. But the preservation of Alexandria's medical knowledge might have had even more profound consequences. The library contained advanced surgical techniques from India, comprehensive pharmacological knowledge from China, and anatomical understanding from Egypt that far exceeded medieval European medical capabilities. Ancient physicians could have developed effective treatments for epidemic diseases that repeatedly devastated European populations. Surgical procedures that weren't perfected in Europe until the modern era could have been routine in ancient hospitals. Understanding of circulation, anatomy, and disease transmission could have prevented plagues that killed millions of people during the medieval period. The mathematical and astronomical knowledge preserved in Alexandria could have accelerated scientific development by centuries. Aristarchus' heliocentric model, supported by comprehensive observational data and mathematical analysis, could have prevented the geocentric errors that dominated medieval astronomy. Ancient astronomers equipped with telescopes, the optical knowledge, existed in Alexandria's collections, could have made detailed observations of planetary surfaces, lunar features, and stellar phenomena. Systematic astronomy, based on accurate mathematical models and precision instruments, could have led to space exploration centuries before the modern era. The engineering knowledge preserved in Alexandria could have produced precision, mechanical systems that would be matched in Europe until the late medieval period. Gear-cutting techniques, metallurgical expertise, and mathematical understanding of mechanical ratios could have created complex machinery for manufacturing, transportation, and scientific research. But perhaps the most significant difference would have been methodological rather than technological. Alexandria represented a systematic approach to knowledge preservation, cross-cultural learning, and collaborative research that wouldn't be recreated until the modern scientific revolution. If Alexandria's institutional model had been replicated throughout the Roman Empire, humanity could have developed systematic scientific methodology centuries earlier. Experimental techniques, peer review systems, and collaborative research programs could have accelerated discovery and prevented the intellectual stagnation that characterized the European Dark Ages. The preservation of diverse cultural knowledge could also have prevented the intellectual homogenization that followed Christianity as dominance in Europe. Ancient philosophical traditions, alternative religious perspectives, and non-European cultural approaches could have continued developing alongside Christian thought, creating more diverse and resilient intellectual traditions. But this alternate timeline raises disturbing questions as well as exciting possibilities. Would advanced ancient technology have led to more destructive warfare? Could Roman armies equipped with steam-powered vehicles and precision weapons have conquered even more territory and enslaved even more populations? Would early industrialization have caused environmental destruction on a massive scale? Ancient civilizations showed little concern for ecological sustainability, and steam-powered industry could have begun deforestation, pollution, and resource depletion centuries earlier than actually occurred. Would technological acceleration have outpaced social and political development, creating unstable societies with advanced weapons but primitive governmental institutions? The Roman Empire, as political structure, was already straining to control Mediterranean territories. Could it have successfully governed global colonies and managed industrial economies? The social implications are equally complex. Would the preservation of ancient learning have prevented the development of democratic political systems that emerged from medieval European traditions? Would technological superiority have perpetuated slavery and social inequality rather than creating opportunities for human liberation? Would early space exploration have led to colonization and exploitation of other planets, extending terrestrial patterns of conquest and environmental destruction to the cosmic scale? Would contact with potential extraterrestrial civilizations have occurred under Roman imperial rather than modern democratic auspices? These questions are unanswerable, but they highlight the complex consequences of Alexandria's destruction. Humanity lost not just specific technologies or discoveries, but entire alternative pathways for social, political, and cultural development. The world we actually inhabit represents only one possible trajectory for human civilization. The knowledge that burned in Alexandria could have created radically different historical pathways that might have been better or worse than the world we know. But one thing is certain: the destruction of Alexandria's library represents the greatest single loss of human potential in recorded history. The technologies, discoveries, and methodologies that could have accelerated human development were eliminated by short-term political conflicts and ideological intolerance. The tragedy isn't just what we lost, it's what we might have become. But what if Alexandria's destruction wasn't complete? What if fragments of the library's collection survived in hidden locations, private collections, or forgotten archives? The evidence suggests that pieces of humanity's lost knowledge may still exist, waiting to be rediscovered. The most dramatic recent discovery occurred in 1998, when scholars at Johns Hopkins University used multispectral imaging to examine a 13th century Byzantine prayer book. Beneath the religious text, they found erased mathematical treatises by Archimedes that had been presumed lost forever. The Christian monks who created the prayer book had scraped away Archimedes' work and written over it, but modern technology revealed the hidden text. This palimpsest contained Archimedes' method of mechanical theorems, which described revolutionary techniques for using physical reasoning to solve mathematical problems. The text also included previously unknown sections of his machine and improved versions of his calculations for the area of a parabolic segment. The discovery proved that ancient texts presumed completely destroyed could survive in unexpected locations. If Archimedes' advanced mathematical works could be preserved beneath medieval religious writings, What other treasures might be hidden in plain sight throughout libraries and archives worldwide? Systematic surveys of medieval manuscripts have revealed dozens of similar palimpsests containing erased ancient texts. The Syriac Galen palimpsest, discovered in 2009, contained medical works by the Greek physician Galen that had been presumed lost. The treatises describe surgical techniques and anatomical observations that weren't rediscovered in Europe until the Renaissance. Private manuscript collections, particularly those maintained by wealthy families for centuries, occasionally yield remarkable discoveries. The Voynich manuscript, a mysterious 5th-10th century codex written in an unknown script, may contain encoded versions of ancient texts that survived Alexandria's destruction through clandestine copying and transmission. Recent analysis suggests the Voynich manuscript has botanical illustrations include plants that were described in ancient medical texts but are unfound in medieval European herbals. The astronomical diagrams contain calculation methods that resemble techniques preserved in Arabic translations of Greek mathematical works. But the most intriguing possibility involves institutional preservation by groups that had strategic reasons for maintaining ancient knowledge in secret. Certain religious communities, merchant organizations, and scholarly societies may have preserved specific texts while concealing their existence from political authorities. The Knights Templar, during their 2 centuries of existence, accumulated vast libraries containing texts from across the Mediterranean world. When the order was suppressed in 1307, their archives were scattered or hidden to prevent confiscation. Some historians believe Templar libraries contained Greek mathematical and astronomical works that had been preserved in Crusader territories. Islamic libraries in Cordoba, Cairo, and Baghdad maintained extensive collections of translated ancient texts throughout the medieval period. When these cities were conquered or politically disrupted, scholarly families often concealed valuable manuscripts to prevent destruction or confiscation. The Medici family's private library in Florence, assembled during the Renaissance, contained numerous Greek manuscripts that had been acquired from Byzantine scholars fleeing the Ottoman conquest of Constantinople. Some of these texts may have originated from Alexandria's collections and survived through continuous copying and preservation in Eastern monasteries. Jesuit missionaries in China during the 17th and 18th centuries discovered Chinese libraries containing translated versions of Greek mathematical and astronomical works. These translations had been made during the Tang Dynasty, when Chinese scholars maintained contact with Islamic centers of learning that possessed Alexandria's preserved texts. Recent archaeological discoveries have revealed buried libraries and archives that survived destruction through accidental preservation. The library at Herculaneum, buried by Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD, contained over 1,000 carbonized papyrus scrolls that are gradually being deciphered using advanced imaging techniques. Digital analysis of these Herculaneum papyri has revealed previously unknown works by Epicurean philosophers, mathematical treatises, and scientific texts that may have originated from Alexandria's collections. The scrolls demonstrate that ancient libraries contained far more diverse and sophisticated materials than previously suspected. Similar discoveries may be waiting in other archaeological sites around the Mediterranean. Ancient Antioch, Pergamon, and Rhodes all maintained substantial libraries that could have contained copies of Alexandrian texts. Systematic excavation and digital analysis of buried archives could yield remarkable discoveries. But the most tantalizing possibility involves deliberate preservation by secret societies or religious communities that recognized the value of ancient knowledge and took systematic steps to protect it from destruction. Some historians argue that certain Gnostic Christian communities, Islamic mystical orders, and Jewish scholarly traditions maintained hidden copying networks that preserved specific ancient texts deemed too valuable or dangerous for public circulation. These clandestine preservation efforts could explain why certain advanced mathematical techniques, astronomical observations, and technological principles occasionally surface in medieval texts without clear transmission pathways from known sources. The Renaissance rediscovery of ancient learning may not have been entirely dependent on Islamic preservation and Byzantine transmission. Some ancient knowledge may have survived in European secret societies that maintained hidden libraries throughout the medieval period. Recent analysis of Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks has revealed engineering concepts and mathematical techniques that do and appear in any known medieval source. Some scholars suggest Leonardo had access to ancient texts that haven't been identified in any surviving library or archive. Similarly, certain medieval alchemical manuscripts contain chemical knowledge and experimental techniques that seem far more advanced than contemporary European science. These texts may preserve fragments of ancient chemical and metallurgical knowledge that survived through clandestine transmission. The possibility that significant portions of Alexandria's knowledge survive in hidden or unrecognized locations has profound implications for modern scholarship. Systematic digital analysis of medieval manuscripts, archaeological investigation of buried libraries, and examination of private collections could yield discoveries that would revolutionize our understanding of ancient learning. But time is running out. Medieval manuscripts are deteriorating rapidly. Private collections are being dispersed, and archaeological sites are being destroyed by development and conflict. The window for recovering Alexandria's lost knowledge may be closing permanently. The race to find surviving fragments has become urgent. Every medieval manuscript that crumbles, every private library that's sold and scattered, every archaeological site that's bulldozed for construction, potentially eliminates irreplaceable links to humanity's greatest intellectual treasure. The question is whether fragments of Alexandria as collections survived. It asks whether we will find them before they re-lost forever. After examining centuries of evidence, one disturbing pattern emerges from the destruction of the Library of Alexandria. This wasn't a series of random accidents or isolated acts of vandalism. It was a systematic campaign by successive power structures to control human knowledge and prevent intellectual independence that might threaten political authority. Caesar's fire wasn't an accidental spread from harbor warehouses. It was a strategic strike against Egypt's intellectual infrastructure designed to transfer Alexandria's knowledge resources to Rome while crippling Egyptian scholarly independence. Christian destruction under Theophilus and Cyril was religious fanaticism. It was calculated cultural revolution designed to eliminate intellectual alternatives to Christian doctrinal authority. Even the Islamic conquest, though it preserved much ancient learning, selectively maintained texts that served Islamic scholarly purposes while allowing other traditions to disappear through neglect. Each crisis eliminated different portions of humanity's accumulated knowledge, but the pattern remained consistent. Political and religious authorities viewed independent, intellectual traditions as threats to be controlled or eliminated rather than treasures to be preserved for all humanity. The real conspiracy wasn't any single plot to destroy the library. It was the systematic subordination of universal human knowledge to particular political and religious agendas. Alexandria represented the dangerous idea that learning belonged to all humanity rather than specific nations, religions, or ideologies. That idea had to be destroyed because it threatened every power structure based on controlling information and limiting intellectual freedom. A population with access to comprehensive knowledge from multiple cultures and traditions could and be easily controlled through propaganda, superstition, or ideological manipulation. The destruction of Alexandria set a precedent that continues today. Throughout history, libraries have been primary targets during wars, revolutions, and political crises. The burning of books has been a standard technique for establishing intellectual control and eliminating alternative perspectives. But Alexandria's destruction was uniquely catastrophic because it eliminated not just individual texts, but entire methodological approaches to knowledge preservation and cross-cultural learning. Humanity lost the institutional model for systematic knowledge synthesis that wouldn't be recreated until the modern era. The consequences extend far beyond ancient history. If Alexandria's knowledge had survived, human technological development could have accelerated by centuries. Scientific methodology could have been established much earlier. Cross-cultural understanding could have prevented countless conflicts based on ignorance and prejudice. The diseases that killed millions during medieval plagues could have been prevented using medical knowledge preserved from ancient sources. The technological stagnation that characterized the European Dark Ages could have been avoided through systematic application of preserved engineering techniques. Most importantly, humanity could have developed more mature and sophisticated approaches to organizing society, managing resources, and resolving conflicts between different cultural traditions. But perhaps the greatest loss was intellectual humility, the recognition that no single culture or tradition possesses complete truth, and that human progress depends on systematic synthesis of knowledge from multiple sources. Alexandria represented that cosmopolitan ideal at its most sophisticated level. The library's destruction marked the beginning of intellectual tribalism that continues to plague human civilization. Instead of building upon each other's achievements, cultures began treating knowledge as private property to be hoarded rather than shared. The pattern established in Alexandria, the subordination of universal learning to particular political interests, remains visible in contemporary conflicts over information access, academic freedom, and scientific research. Political and religious authorities still view independent intellectual traditions as threats rather than treasures. But the story doesn't end with destruction and loss. Every generation has the opportunity to choose between Alexandria's cosmopolitan ideal and the narrow tribalism that destroyed it. We can choose to preserve and share knowledge across cultural boundaries, or we can repeat the mistakes that eliminated humanity's greatest intellectual achievement. Modern technology has created new possibilities for knowledge, preservation, and sharing that exceed even Alexandria's capabilities. Digital networks can make information accessible globally without requiring centralized physical collections vulnerable to destruction. But technology alone is insufficient. The same institutions and attitudes that destroyed Alexandria threaten digital knowledge preservation today. Government censorship, corporate control of information, and ideological attacks on academic freedom represent contemporary versions of the forces that eliminated humanity's greatest library. The real question isn't whether fragments of Alexandria's selection still exist in hidden archives or forgotten manuscripts, though they probably do. The real question is whether humanity will learn from Alexandria's destruction and choose to create new institutions dedicated to preserving and sharing knowledge for the benefit of all people rather than particular political interests. Alexandria's legacy isn't just the knowledge that was lost. It's the ideal that knowledge belongs to all humanity and that intellectual freedom is essential for human progress. That ideal survived Alexandria's destruction and continues to inspire scholars, scientists, and educators who believe in the power of learning to improve human civilization. The conspiracy that destroyed Alexandria was ultimately unsuccessful. The ideal of universal knowledge preservation has inspired countless efforts to collect, preserve, and share human learning across cultural and political boundaries. Every library, every university, every effort to make knowledge freely accessible represents a victory over the forces that burned Alexandria. Every scholar who chooses truth over ideology, every teacher who encourages critical thinking, every citizen who demands intellectual freedom carries forward Alexandria's mission. The Library of Alexandria was destroyed, but its spirit survives in every institution dedicated to preserving human knowledge and making it accessible to future generations. The greatest treasure of the ancient world lives on in our continued commitment to learning, discovery, and the free exchange of ideas. Alexandria's fire couldn't destroy the human drive to understand, to learn, and to share knowledge across the boundaries that divide us. That drive is humanity's greatest strength and our best hope for building a future worthy of Alexandria's legacy. The conspiracy that stole our past doesn't have to determine our future. We still have the power to choose knowledge over ignorance, understanding over prejudice, and universal human learning over narrow tribal interests. The real Alexandria lives wherever people gather to learn, to discover, and to preserve knowledge for future generations. As long as that spirit survives, Alexandria's greatest treasures, curiosity, learning, and the search for truth, can never be completely destroyed. Some say the greatest conspiracy of all isn't that the library was destroyed, but that some of its knowledge still exists, hidden in secret archives, encoded in mysterious manuscripts, or buried in archaeological sites waiting to be discovered. What do you think? Was the Library of Alexandria destroyed completely by political conspiracy and religious intolerance? Or are fragments of humanity's greatest intellectual treasure still out there, waiting for the right person to find them and restore this lost knowledge to the world? The search continues. Every ancient manuscript examined, every archaeological site excavated, every digital analysis of historical texts could be the discovery that changes everything. The next breakthrough could come from a monastery library in Tibet, a private collection in Europe, or ruins buried beneath a Mediterranean city. Alexandria's greatest secrets may not be lost forever. They may just be waiting for us to find them.